All right, welcome back, everybody. Corey Hughes, Bloody History. Today we're going to cover the testimony of James Wilcott. Wilcott's a former CIA agent, and his testimony is pretty eye-opening. I've read this a bunch of times before. I've known about it for a long time. How I feel about it, that's the question. Do I believe it or not believe it? I don't know. I think that this can be ignored. This testimony can be ignored, and we could still conclude that Oswald was an intelligence agent. I mean, I think that's pretty obvious. This testimony, as you'll see, is pretty fantastic, meaning somewhat outrageous. But the truthfulness of it, I'll let you decide. So this begins with an email from Jim Hargrove dated 2/12/99. Oswald and the CIA. On March 22nd, 1978, former CIA accountant James B. Wilcott swore under oath before the House Select Committee on Assassinations that he believed that Lee Harvey Oswald was a regular employee of the Central Intelligence Agency, and that he believed Oswald received a full-time salary for agent work for doing CIA operational work. He testified that he was told by another CIA employee that money he, Wilcott, had personally dispersed was for the, quote, Oswald Project, or for Oswald, end quote. The modestly redacted full text of Wilcott's testimony was kept out of the public's eye for 2 decades. The copy which I scanned, OCR'd, and present in full was obtained by John Armstrong in early 1998 and sent to me by Michael Parks. I've previously posted excerpts of Wilcott's testimony to alt.conspiracy.jfk, but this is the first time the testimony appears here in full. Redactions, which are minimal, are indicated with X's. No attempt has been made to match the character count of redacted material, but all redactions are short, no more than a word or two. It should be noted that this HSCA report, probably written by Robert Blakey or written under his direct supervision, briefly and somewhat inaccurately summarized Wilcott's testimony and then pointedly tried to discredit it. Here is the full text of that criticism, which appears on page 199 and 200 of the HSCA report. In an attempt to investigate Wilcott's allegations, the committee interviewed several present and former CIA employees selected on the basis of the position each had held during the years of 1954 to 1964. Among the persons interviewed were individuals whose responsibilities covered a broad spectrum of areas in the post abroad, including the chief and deputy chief of station, as well as officers in finance, registry, the Soviet branch, and counterintelligence. None of these individuals interviewed had ever seen any documents or heard any information indicating that Oswald was an agent. This allegation was not known by any of them until it was published by critics of the Warren Commission in the late 1960s. Some of the individuals, including a chief of counterintelligence in the Soviet branch, expressed the belief that it was possible that Oswald had been recruited by the Soviet KGB during his military tour of duty overseas, as the CIA had identified a KGB program aimed at recruiting U.S. military personnel during the period Oswald was stationed there. An intelligence analyst, whom Wilcott had specifically named as having been involved in a conversation about the Oswald allegation, told the committee that he was not in the post abroad at the time of the assassination. A review of this individual's office and personnel file confirmed that. In fact, he had been transferred from the post abroad to the United States in 1962. The chief of the post abroad from 1961 to 1964 stated that had Oswald been used by the agency, he certainly would have learned about it. Similarly, almost all persons who interviewed who worked on the Soviet branch of that station indicated they would have known if Oswald had in fact been recruited by the CIA when overseas. These persons expressed the opinion that had Oswald been recruited without their knowledge, it would have been a rare exception contrary to the working policy and guidelines of the post abroad. Based on all evidence, the committee concluded that Wilcott's allegation is not worthy of belief. End quote. It's been my long-held opinion that it is patently obvious from reports of Oswald's travels to and from the Soviet Union that Oswald was some sort of agent for the United States government, despite long and vigorous denials ranging from the Warren Commission to recent posters to this news group. This reading still strikes me as self-evident. I therefore believe James Wilcott's sworn testimony and disbelieve the HSCA's denial. To my knowledge, interviews referred to by the HSCA that contradict Wilcott's testimony have never been released. The full text of Wilcott's testimony is reproduced below. Jim Hargrove. All right, executive session. Assassination of President John Kennedy, Wednesday, March 22nd, 1978. House of Representatives, John F. Kennedy Subcommittee on the Select Committee of Assassinations, Washington, D.C. The subcommittee met at 10:20 a.m. pursuant to notice in room 2344 of the Rayburn office building that the Honorable Richard Pryor, chairman of the subcommittee, presiding. Present Representative Pryor, presiding, Dodd and Sawyer. Also present, Michael Goldsmith, counsel, and Gary Cornwell, counsel. Also present, Elizabeth Burning, chief clerk, and Charles Burke, Betsy Wolfe, and James Wolfe. Mr. Pryor, thank you for being here today. I will call the subcommittee to order at this time. I will ask if you will stand and be sworn. Do you solemnly swear to state that the evidence you're about to give before the subcommittee will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Mr. Wilcott says, I do. I would like, before we begin, to read a written statement concerning the subject of the investigation. This is Mr. Pryor speaking. We are operating under House Resolution 222, which mandates the committee to conduct a full and complete investigation and study of the circumstances surrounding the assassination and death of President John F. Kennedy, including determining whether the existing laws of the United States concerning the protection of the president and the investigatory jurisdiction and capability of agencies and departments are adequate in their provisions and enforcement, and whether there was full disclosure of evidence and information among agencies and department of the United States government, and whether any evidence or information not in the possession of an agency of department would have been of assistance in investigating the assassination, and why such information was not provided or collected by that agency or department, and to make recommendations to the House if the Select Committee deems it appropriate for the amendment of existing legislation or the enactment of new legislation. That is what we are attempting to accomplish, which is quite a big order. We appreciate your being here today, Mr. Wilcott. And then in parentheses, it says, whereupon a recess was taken while the members of the committee went to the floor for a House vote. And then Mr. Pryor said, we will come to order. We will resume the session, and I will recognize counsel to begin questioning. Testimony of James B. Wilcott, a former employee of the Central Intelligence Agency. Mr. Goldsmith, for the record, would you please state your name and address and occupation? My name is James B. Wilcott. My address is 2761 Atlantic Street in Concord. My occupation is electronic technician. Where is Concord located? It is a bit east of Oakland, California. Have you received a copy of the committee's rules? Yes. And a copy of the relevant House resolutions? Yes. And Mr. Wilcott, is it true that you were a former employee of the CIA and that you are here today testifying voluntarily without subpoena? Yes. During what years did you work for the CIA? I worked from the years May of 57 to April of 1966. And in what general capacity did you work with the CIA? All in the finance, in accounting, all of the time. How did you become employed by the CIA? I was recruited from the school in Syracuse, New York, where I was taking a course in accounting and business administration. Very generally now, what were your responsibilities as a finance employee with the agency? Well, from May of 57 to January of 60. Excuse me, just answer the question. Very generally, without referring to anything right now, and please describe generally what your responsibilities were as a finance officer. My responsibilities were primarily record-keeping and dispersing of funds. Mr. Wilcott, are you here today with counsel? Yes, I am. Would your counsel identify himself for the recorder? My name is William Schaap, S-C-H-A-A-P. I am attorney here in Washington. I will give my card to the committee. Let's pull everything on Mr. William Schaap, S-C-H-A-A-P, and see if he's a CIA lawyer. Mr. Wilcott, did I ask you to prepare a list indicating the dates that you were employed with the CIA and where you were stationed? Yes, you did. Did you prepare such a list? Yes, I did. Do you have the list with you? Yes, I do. Referring to the list, would you tell the committee where you were stationed during the period with the CIA? Certainly, from May of 57 to January of 60, I was in the prefab building on the Potomac in finance. During the period, it was unvouchered funds, and my duties were general accounting, and my rate in status was GS5. From about January 60 to June of 60, I was transferred to the finance field payroll, also in the same building on the Potomac. This was making payments and keeping pay records. From June of 1960 to June of 1964, I was stationed at Redacted Station, and my primary duty was finance and cash disbursements. This was all cash payments and record keeping for the station, and during that period, I had been promoted. We have to assume, since this is 60 to 64, that he was stationed at Atsugi in Japan. He was promoted to GS6 and GS7, also gained career status. From June of 64 to December of 64, he was at Roseland. This was just prior to moving to Langley in finance, and my duties there were policing accounts and including auditing of special accounts. From January of 65 to about March of 65, I was at Langley in the same area in finance, policing accounts and auditing of special accounts. I was promoted to GS9. From April of 65 to April of 66, I was at Miami Station in finance, and I was handling the staff payroll. This was preparing and reconciling payrolls. In April of 66, I resigned from the CIA. I take it from your testimony that in November of 63, you were stationed in, and it's redacted, but we can assume it's Atsugi. Mr. Wilcott, is that right? Drawing your attention to the period immediately after the assassination of President Kennedy, at that time, did you come across any information concerning Lee Harvey Oswald's relationship with the CIA? Yes, I did. And will you tell the committee what that relationship was? Well, it was my understanding that Lee Harvey Oswald was an employee of the agency and was an Agent 7 of the agency. Mr. Goldsmith, what do you mean by the term agent? Well, he was a regular employee receiving a full-time salary for agent work for doing CIA operational work. How did this information concerning Oswald first come to your attention? The first time I heard about Oswald being connected in any way with the CIA was the day after Kennedy's assassination. And how did that come to your attention? Well, I was on duty for the station. It was a guard-type function at the station, which I worked for overtime. There was a lot of excitement going on at the station after the Kennedy assassination. Towards the end of my tour of duty, I heard certain things about Oswald somehow being connected with the agency, and I didn't really believe this when I heard it. I thought it was absurd. Then as time went on, I began to hear more things in that line. I think we'd better go over that one more time. When exactly was the first time that you heard or came across information that Oswald was an agent? I heard references to it the day after the assassination. And who made these references to Oswald being an agent of the CIA? I can't remember the exact persons. There was talk about it going on at the station and several months following at the station. How many people made this reference to Oswald being an agent of the CIA? At least there were at least 6 or 7 people specifically who said that they either knew or believed Oswald to be an agent of the CIA. Was Jerry Fox one of these people that made this allegation? To the best of my recollection, yes. And who was Jerry Fox? Jerry Fox was a case officer for his branch, the Soviet Russia branch, redacted station, who purchased information from the Soviets. Let's see if we can't pull everything on Jerry Fox, but we're probably dealing with an alias here. Mr. Wilcott, did I ask you to prepare a list of CIA case officers working at redacted station in 63? Yes, you did. Did you prepare such a list? Yes, I did. Is that list complete, and does it have every CIA case officer who worked at redacted in 1963? Oh, no, it doesn't have everyone. It has everyone that I can remember. Did you bring that list with you today? Yes, I did. Were any of these people on your list possible subjects who made references to Oswald being a CIA agent? Yes. Would you read the list to the committee? Yes, only of case officers. I think we ought to state that the record shows that Mr. Sawyer is a member of the Kennedy subcommittee. We will. Upon your memory and the list that you brought with you today, will you tell the committee the names of the CIA case officers who you remember working redacted in 1963? Yes, there was Redacted Branch, who had redacted cover. Jerry Fox, SR Branch, Soviet Russia Branch. Excuse me, please proceed slowly. Jerry Fox, SR Branch. Reed Dennis, Chief of Soviet Satellite Branch, and the redacted China Branch. And he also had a cover, John P. Horton, redacted, Section Redacted Branch, and Chester Ito, ITO, Redacted Branch, and Kan Takai, Kantakai, Redacted Branch, and Jim Delaney, China Branch, and Bob Rentner, SR Branch, and there was some question about that, the branch that he was with. Larry Watanabe, Redacted Branch, Senior Case Officer, and Redacted Deep Commercial Cover Agent. There was a person, Dave, who was a deputy chief. Dave, I can't remember his last name, deputy chief of the China branch. And then a person whose last name was redacted in the redacted branch. Do you remember which of these individuals, if any, made the specific allegation or reference that Oswald was an agent? It's been 15 years, and I can't remember specifically who said what, but certainly I am sure that Jerry Fox, for instance, had made at least some mention of it. At the time of this allegation first came your attention, did you discuss it with anyone? Oh yes, I discussed it with my friends and the people that I was associating with socially. Who were your friends that you discussed it with? Mr. Wilcott says it's redacted, and then George Breen, Ed Luck, and redacted. Who was George Breen? George Breen was a person in registry who was my closest friend while I was in redacted. Was he a CIA employee? Yes, he was. Let's pull everything on George Breen, please. And would he corroborate your observation that Oswald was an agent? I don't know. At the time that this allegation first came to your attention, did you learn that the name of Oswald's case officer in the CIA? No. Were there any other times during your stay with the CIA at Redacted Station that you came across information that Oswald had been a CIA agent? Yes. When was that? The specific incident was soon after the Kennedy assassination, where an agent, a case officer, I am sure it was a case officer, came up to my window to draw money. And he specifically said in the conversation that ensued, he specifically said, "Well, Jim, the money that I drew the last couple of weeks ago or so was money either for the Oswald Project or for Oswald." Do you remember the name of this case officer? No, I don't. Do you remember when specifically this conversation took place? Not specifically, only generally. How many months after the assassination was this? I think it must have been 2 or 3 months after the assassination. Do you remember where this conversation took place? It was right at my window, my dispersing cage window. Did you discuss the information with anyone? Oh, yes. With whom? Certainly with George Breen, redacted, the circle of social friends we had. How do you spell redacted last name? And then it's redacted again. Mr. Shapp, for the record, I have made a list of all these spellings of the names which have been mentioned, which I give to the stenographer so that he will have them correctly. Mr. Goldsmith, did this case, that was Mr. Goldsmith saying, did this case officer tell you what Oswald's cryptonym was? Yes, he mentioned the cryptonym specifically under which the money was drawn. And what did he tell you the cryptonym was? I cannot remember. What was your response to this revelatic as to what Oswald's cryptonym was? Did you write it down or anything? No, I think that I looked through my advance book, and I had a book where the advances on projects were run, and I leafed through them, and I must have at least leafed through them to see if what he said was true. And are you saying then that you attempted to investigate this allegation? No, I'm not saying that. It was more of a casual kind of thing to my way of thinking. Did you check your cash disbursement files? Not the files, no. I'm not sure I'm following then. What specifically did you check? I had a book that I at the end of the day we would list all the advances that were made in an advance book. It was just a 3-ring binder, and we would list down the advances by cryptonym and the amounts and then reconcile that with the daily disbursements. How long were these records maintained? They were maintained on a 30-day basis, and then they were closed off at the end of each month. So does that mean you were able to check back only 30 days from the time you were given this information? Yes. I realize this testimony is 15 years after the fact. However, if you received this information 2 or 3 months after the assassination, at a time Oswald had already been dead and had been dead for 2 or 3 months, what purpose would there have been served by checking records that were only 30 days old? Do you follow the question? No. Well, in other words, if you got the information 3 months after the assassination, Oswald had already been dead for 3 months. Is that right? Yes. Answer yes or no for the recorder. Yes. You testified that your records were only kept for 30 days. Is that correct? Yes. Then by checking your records, which only went back 30 days, isn't it true that you wouldn't have gotten any information concerning Oswald anyway because Oswald had already been dead for 1 or 2 months? That is true. So then really no purpose would have been served by checking those records. That is right. Did you check any other records? No. I understand, this is Mr. Pryor speaking. I understand this is might be a good place for us to take a break and go vote, so that will be another recess, about 10 minutes, and then they take a break. And then the committee resumes. Mr. Wilcott, you indicated that after receiving this information concerning Oswald's cryptonym, you went back to check some files. Is that correct? Not really files. It was my book. Your book? I flipped through it. What was the name of your book? It was my request for advance book. And for purposes of clarification now, if Oswald was already dead at the time that you went through this book, why did you go back to examine the book? Well, I'm sorry, if Oswald was what? At the time you went to look at the book, Oswald was already dead. Is that correct? That is right. Why did you go back to look at the book? Well, the payments that were made, especially at substations like Oswald's was operated, it was a substation of the redacted station, and they had one in redacted and they had one in redacted. And it may be 6 months or even a year after the initial allocation that the final accounting for those funds were submitted, and they would operate out of a revolving funds or out of their own personal funds in many cases. So is it your testimony that even though Oswald was already dead at the time, the book might have contained a reference to either Oswald or the Oswald Project, and that reference would have been to a period 6 months or even a year earlier? Is that correct? That is correct. How long were these advance books retained? They were retained for approximately 1 year by the finance office, approximately 1 to 2 years, and then were destroyed at the time of audit. So they would be routinely destroyed at the time of auditing. Yes. Did you check any of the earlier books? No, I didn't. As far as the Oswald cryptonym was concerned, no, I didn't. So basically, you checked only one of the advanced books. Is that correct? My current one that I had on my counter. And when you testified earlier that you learned Oswald's cryptonym, by that you meant you learned that both Oswald's personal cryptonym and his project cryptonym, or was it one of the two? Well, it was just a cryptonym. It could refer to a person or it could refer to something else. And I would have no way of knowing what a cryptonym referred to. So when the officer told you, strike that. So when the case officer made reference to a cryptonym, you didn't know whether the cryptonym referred to Oswald specifically or to a project which Oswald had been involved with. Yes, sir. Mr. Wilcott, assuming that Oswald had been employed as an agent by the CIA, would there have been a reference to that fact in the CIA's cash disbursement file? No. Why not? Anything they had there sometimes they had used many as 2 or 3 different cryptonyms, and they would have it all depended on how far they wanted to isolate it from the original source as to where the project was run. But as a matter of routine, would the CIA cash disbursement files refer to the cryptonym of either the person or the project that is receiving the funds? Yes, I'm sure somewhere. As a matter of routine, there would be that reference. Do you believe that there was such a reference on Oswald? Yes, I do. I believe there was such a reference. Well, if I understand you correctly, then your answer now is somewhat different from what you testified earlier. And I will ask the question again, okay? Yes. Assuming that Oswald was an agent for the CIA, would the agency's cash disbursement files have referred to either Oswald or his cryptonym? Yes. And you have had access to the cash disbursement files at Redacted Station? Yes, for a limited period. Were you ever able to check those particular files? I was able to, but I never did. So you never checked the cash disbursements to see if any reference was made to Oswald or his cryptonym, is that correct? That is right. It was only my personal files, my internal files prior to the end of the month. I understand. How long were the cash disbursement files or records maintained? The details, approximately 2 years. We had accountings or we had audits about every 2 years, and then the files that I kept the requests for advances, the details of the accountings that were done usually on a monthly basis by Redacted Station branches would be destroyed, and then they would be, and in fact I helped destroy them. Are you saying then that the cash disbursement files as a matter of routine would be periodically destroyed? Yes. Do you know whether CIA headquarters would have had either copies or originals of the cash disbursement files? They would have summaries of some sort. Would those summaries be destroyed as a matter of routine to your knowledge? I really don't know. Were you ever able to find any indication in any of the Redacted Station's records that Oswald was in fact a CIA agent? Well, I never really looked. To your knowledge, would any records at CIA headquarters document that Oswald was an agent? I believe they would at one time. Whether they are there now, it's hard to say. Did you have any personal knowledge that any records at CIA headquarters were ever destroyed? No. Do you have any knowledge of any record of the CIA at Redacted Station ever being destroyed out of the ordinary course of business, not as a matter of routine? Yes. To your personal knowledge, CIA records at Redacted were destroyed. Destroyed or changed. Could you give me an example of that? Yes, let us say, for instance, that there was a certain project going on, and the project was one that became known that this project was being carried out, and we call it flaps. And the case officer in charge might get word that somebody from headquarters was coming in to review the files to investigate the flap. Well, they would go through the files and take out anything that they thought was, say, indicative of how this flap occurred and change the files. For instance, in accounting, when we had our audits, for instance, in most of the audits, he would call up somebody, let's say in China branch, and say, I know you were having problems with this. Would you like to look it over before the auditors come? And they might look it over and retype the accounting for funds for their project and, make changes that they think were in their interest to do so. Did you ever actually Xerox records being destroyed or changed? Yes, I did. Have you just described one of those instances? Yes. Mr. Wilcott, after leaving Redacted Station, was there any other time when you came across any information that indicated that Oswald was a CIA agent? In conversation. Is the answer to that yes? Yes. When did that occur? From the time I left, I talked at various times, especially at parties and things like that on social occasions, and with people at headquarters and with people at my station, and we would converse about it. And I used to say things like, what do you think about Oswald being connected with the CIA? And things like that. What was their response? The response was among quite a few people, oh, well, I'm sure he was. What were these people's names? Again, well, it's George Breen. After we came back from Redacted, for instance, Redacted was a person that I knew before I had gone to the station, and I met with him, and I had dinner at his house with his wife and my wife. Just give us their names. Anyone else? Not that I can recall. So is it your testimony that once you left the station, people both at headquarters in Langley and at the Miami station made references to Oswald being an agent? Is that correct? Yes, in a speculative manner. How many people have you spoken to and said that Oswald was an agent of the CIA, to the best of your recollection? And then Mr. Shop says, do you mean how many people who were in the CIA or how many people in the general population? How many people in the CIA? And Wilcott says, with any degree of certainty, other than just speculation, I would say 6 or 7 with some degree of certainty. These are people he spoke to about Oswald. Do you have a personal opinion as to for what purpose the CIA might have handled any projects that involved Lee Harvey Oswald? I'm sorry? Do you have an opinion as to how the CIA might have handled any projects involving Oswald and for what purposes they might have used Oswald? Well, I have opinions. What is that opinion? I believe that Oswald was a double agent. He was sent to the Soviet Union to do intelligence work, that the defection was phony and it was set up, and that I believe Marina Oswald was an agent that had been recruited sometime before and was waiting there in Tokyo for Lee Harvey Oswald. What's the basis for that opinion? The basis for that is discussions that I had with people at the station. Those are discussions with people who gave the indication that there was every certainty that Oswald was an agent of the CIA run out of Redacted Station and that he was freed from Russia there in the final courses in Russia and was trained by CIA people at Atsugi. However, your testimony is that you spoke to only 6 people as an estimate who indicated that Oswald was an agent. When I say 6 people, I mean 6 CIA people. Is that correct? There were more people than that, I believe, and 6 people with any degree of certainty that, I felt from. They were saying they either had some kind of substantial knowledge or they had talked to somebody who had some knowledge. How many people from the CIA did you speak with who had speculated that Oswald was an agent? Dozens, literally dozens. Do you have any explanations for why none of these people have come forward with this story? Yes. What's this explanation? I've been trying to talk about this thing and other things for the last 10 years. I found it very, very difficult to talk about these things, and I think ought to be talked about. Very difficult. I talked to reporters from various papers. I talked to people in other forms of meetings, and to me, it's not surprising at all. I think I am certain in my own mind that if these people were approached, that some of these people... Why has it been difficult? Well, it's been difficult because people don't want to get involved, and people were scared. I was scared until the Carter administration. I was really scared to go to the government and talk about any of these things. Did you bring your allegation to the attention to the Warren Commission? No, I did not. And what's the reason for that? I really didn't think the Warren Commission was out to get the facts. I'm not saying that they purposely did anything, because I don't know, and maybe they did or maybe they didn't, but certainly they didn't impress me as really trying to scrutinize the evidence that there was. And their security that there is in the government didn't strike me as the kind of security that would keep me from getting attacked in some way if someone wanted to do it. How did you know in 1963 what type of security precautions the Warren Commission had for conducting its investigation? I don't understand. You have indicated that you were not inclined to go to the Warren Commission because you were concerned about their security. Yes. Did you have any basis for thinking their security was poor? In 1963, I wasn't thinking that much about it. So it never really came forward to you that the Warren Commission did it, not until after I left the agency. When was the first time that you alleged in public that Oswald was a CIA agent? In 1968. So you first came across this information in November of 63. Is that correct? That is correct. And the first time you alleged this in public was 68. Is that correct? Yes. Why did you wait 5 years? We thought every year, my wife and I, the friends we had, we said, well, this is the one thing they aren't going to keep a lid on. And we thought every year it was going to be coming out. And especially I didn't think that since what I had heard was all hearsay, that I would never have seen Oswald or anything like that. This is not the kind of thing that would be used for even something like the Warren Commission. And they would have to have something more substantial than that to go on, aside from the fact that I never would have done it in the CIA, being a very risky thing to do within the CIA. Is it fair to say that the CIA is an operation that runs itself on a need-to-know basis? Would you tell the committee what need-to-know principle is? It's based on the principle that only those persons who are involved in a project or involved in an operation, even things that would not seem to be at all in any way secret, only those people should know about it and nobody else knows about it. And that was a need-to-know basis. If the agency was in fact run on a need-to-know basis, how would you account for so many people supposedly knowing that Oswald was an agent? The need-to-know principle was not at all what we followed, and just about every one of those big projects that the agency was involved in, information leaked out. And we, especially within the CIA, knew about it. And someone would go to a party and have a little bit too much to drink and start saying things they really shouldn't be saying. And keep in mind what the need-to-know principle was. Why would anyone have shared this particular information with you? Especially after Kennedy's assassination, there was a great deal of very serious discontent within the agency. The morale at the station had dropped considerably, and we heard some very, very bitter denunciations of CIA and the projects they were undertaking. I'm not sure that that is responsive. Why would anyone share the information that Oswald was an agent with you, Mr. Wilcott? I don't know how to answer that. Mr. Shop says, "Excuse me?" And then the witness confers with his counsel. Do you have anything to add in response to that question? Wilcott says, yes, I was on security duty, and on security duty, agents were coming in and out of the station, and I pulled a lot of security duty, 3 or 4 nights in a row, and pulled as much as 24 hours on weekends, and an agent would come back from a meeting with somebody, and he would be waiting for his wife to pick him up, or would be waiting for a call from one of the indigenous agents that he was running, and a lot of times conversations would be talked. And I think this is why I probably heard a lot more things than other people did, for instance, than my wife, because of that situation. Mr. Wilcott, when did you leave the agency? I left the agency in April of 66 for the Miami station. I'm sorry, I didn't hear. To the Miami station. And you were dismissed by the agency, or did you resign? I resigned. To your knowledge, did the CIA ever conduct an investigation into your allegation that Oswald was an agent? Okay, so let me pause right here, because I remember this fucking from years ago when I first read this, that this is where I find his testimony to be questionable. Okay? I don't understand what he's saying here. Mr. Goldsmith asks him, Mr. Wilcott, when did you leave the agency? And then Wilcott says, I left the agency in April of 66 for the Miami station. What? What Miami station? What Miami station? The JM Wave station was in Miami through 66. Did he go and become, and you already mentioned that he was working with the CIA at Miami, so he was obviously doing some work with JM Wave prior to 66. But it says that he left the agency in April of 66 for the Miami station. That to me seems like a slip of the tongue. Like he worked his way up in the agency to a point where he is now sheep-dipped off the books. That's what I got from this. Why would he call it Miami Station? I left the agency in April of 66 for the Miami Station. That's what he said. And then when he's asked to clarify, he says it again. He goes, I'm sorry, I didn't hear. And then Wilcott says again, to the Miami station. And then Goldsmith asks, were you dismissed by the agency or did you resign? And he says, I resigned. So what does that mean? How did you resign, but then go to the Miami station? You see, I think that's a slip of the tongue. I think he got sheep dipped. Sheep dipping of accountants. That's interesting. Real interesting. Did you ever bring your allegation to the attention of anyone in the CIA? No. Can you give the committee the names of any persons who might corroborate your allegation? All the people that were mentioned in the case. And finally, as I said at the beginning, is it fair to say that you were here voluntarily today? Yes, it is. And you testify without any reservation? Yes. And your testimony's been truthful and candid? Yes. I have nothing further, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Pryor then says, I'll ask you a few questions. Why this information would come out to a CIA station redacted rather than some other parts of the world is, I assume, because Oswald was trained in Japan, according to your belief. He was in the military service over there, so you feel he was a double agent who was trained while he was in the military by the CIA, and you mentioned he was given a Russian course. And do you know for a fact that he was given a Russian course? No, I know for a fact, or I know from hearsay, and I believe it to be true from the circumstances how this conversation came up and so on. Well, that is the other question I want to be very sure on. I think you're making some important allegations here, and you have been very helpful in giving some witnesses names through which we might be able to corroborate it. But I think it's very important that we know clearly how much of this cocktail party was cocktail party talk and how much was shop talk and how much was speculation and rumor and how much was hard fact. You mentioned the day after the assassination, you talked to someone at the station about it. Did he say to you, I think Oswald was a CIA agent? Or did that first person say to you that he was a CIA agent? Can you recall whether the tone of it was rumor or shop talk, or was the tone of it, this is true? Well, so the day after the assassination, I don't think there was any kind of talk. The day after, perhaps 2 or 3 weeks after, the kind of talk was that the CIA was somehow connected. That was shop talk, speculation, I gather. People were saying that the CIA is somehow connected with it. Well, I believe it to be a little more than speculation, that the source, at least, of this kind of talk was, I believe, to be something more serious than speculation. It was your conclusion from that talk that some of these people might have known that he was a CIA agent rather than they were speculating about it. Yes, sir. And did you mention the case officer who came in and told you that the money he had drawn out a few weeks earlier was drawn out for Oswald? Yes, sir. He stated the fact, and not that he believed it drawn out as Oswald, or could it have been something like that? It was stated as fact, Oswald or the Oswald Project. How many people were at the station in Redacted approximately? Mr. Wilcott says, I believe our full strength was around Redacted, and we never actually had that many. I don't think it was about Redacted. I think it was our actual roster. I think our actual roster was. And Miami, was that comparable size? No, that was a smaller station. So in that Redacted, you indicated 6 or 7 people talked to you and were, as I understood it, rather definite about the Oswald connection. Yes, sir. And dozens of others talked to you in a general, speculative manner. Yes, sir. Why did you resign from the CIA? My wife and I came to believe that what CIA was doing couldn't be reconciled to basic principles of democracy or basic principles of humanism. It had no relation to your performance? No, sir. I think I had good performance reviews right up to the time I left. I believe you've written an article about this, an unpublished article. Yes. And have you made that available to us? Yes, I have. Thank you. I have no further questions. Mr. Sawyer then says, do you distinguish between an agent and a paid informant, or do you use those terms interchangeably? Well, sir, I think of an agent as an actual employee of the agency. We call them indigenous agents. Redacted, who were agents that were on a regular salary by the case officer who was running an agent. And then there were a lot of one-time informers, or maybe 1 or 2 or 3-time informers who were paid like maybe $50 to attend a meeting of a political party or something of that nature. When you refer to Oswald as an agent, you're referring to the extent you have as an agent as opposed to a paid informer, in effect. Yes, it's my belief he was a regular agent, and this was a regular project of the agency to send Oswald to the Soviet Union. Now, did the redacted station have any jurisdiction over the Russian operation or within the Soviet Union? Yes, sir. That was the SR branch, which had all the projects having anything to do with the Soviet Union. All right, so let's pause right here. So all of the projects having anything to do with the Soviet Union, including false defectors, were run out of Atsugi. That I bet is true. Can we confirm this, please, that the SR branch, that's obviously the Soviet branch, was actually run out of Atsugi? Because that would make perfect sense. I mean, that would be more than coincidence, wouldn't it? That Oswald was at Atsugi, a CIA base that they ran the Soviet operations out of, and then he defects to the Soviet Union. Come on. It went through the redacted station. Well, that was just those that were assigned to redacted in those projects that were assigned to redacted. Every station was divided up. At least every class station was divided up into areas where we would have a China branch, Korea branch, and a redacted branch, and a SR branch, and a SR satellite. I noticed in some of the information we are provided, you say the following: you're leaving the CIA in 1967 or thereabouts. For a period of some 3 years or so, you were harassed by the CIA and the FBI and sabotaged, as I recollect it. Yes, sir, I believe that happened. Could you tell us what those things consisted of? I think the most significant thing that can be actually substantiated is the circumstances surrounding my employment with the Community Renewal Program in Utica, and I was the finance analyst for the Community Renewal Program in Utica. One day, Frank O'Connor, the director of the program, called me into his office, and he said that he had a discussion with the Public Safety Commissioner, and that the Public Safety Commissioner told him that my phone was bugged and that my house was under surveillance and that a federal indictment was coming down on me at any time. That he had talked to the mayor, and the mayor decided not to fire me but asked me to sign a resignation form, which he would date the day previous to the date that the federal indictment came down. Who told this to the community development people? My boss, Frank O'Connor, said this was, let's pull everything on Frank O'Connor, CIA, please, said that it was told by him the Public Safety Commissioner and the FBI had told the Public Safety Commissioner. Who was the Public Safety Commissioner? I don't remember his name offhand now. Was he in Utica? Yes, the mayor, Mr. Sawyer, was Dominic Casaro. He was the mayor at the time. Were there any other instances of harassment? Yes, there were several other incidents that I believe could possibly be somehow connected with CIA. What were they? Well, there were such incidents as the FBI agent that was working with a group, and this was an established fact that this person was an FBI agent and that he was working with the group that I was working with, an anti-war group. And to my mind, there was a very great likelihood that this person was there to neutralize me, as the CIA term went. What did he do? Anything? Well, I would get calls and they would say, "We know all about you," shooting a machine gun into the phone and hanging up. I would get notes written in snow or on my windshield, and I had slips of paper left under my windshield and this sort of thing. What would they say? They were extremely vulgar, and I don't think I should give the full context of them. What was the gist of them? Well, it was, "We all know about you," and signed the Minutemen, or some vulgar remarks, "We know all about you," signed the Minutemen. What was the name of the FBI agent who you think infiltrated this anti-war group? Gordon Finch. He was also in Utica? Yes. What were some other instances? Well, my tires were slashed and damage done to my car, and I believe sugar poured in the gas tank. And whether this was actually CIA or not, I have no way of knowing, and I think it could have been just for harassment as a result of anti-war activities. But I think there is also a possibility it could have been attempts to intimidate me into talking about the CIA. Were there any others you can specifically identify as coming from the CIA or FBI? I don't confirm any of them except with the Community Renewal Program as coming from there, and I am suspicious that there have been other things that have happened and may have had as its source the CIA. Well, what were your anti-war activities that you refer to? We had in Utica, there was a group called the Vietnam Educational Council, which was formed to inform people as to what was going on in Vietnam, and we didn't feel that there was coverage enough in the media as to what was going on, and the purpose of the Vietnam Educational Council was to inform people as to what was going on. I was on the executive committee along with doctors and lawyers and some of the most respected people in the community. How long were you associated with that? Approximately 2 years, sir. Thank you. That's all I have. Mr. Dodd then says, I have a couple of questions. First of all, I apologize for having run in and out during your testimony. Some of this you may have already covered, and if you have, I'll proceed. But if not, I was intrigued, and it may have been in the transcript, but you were in redacted as a financial disbursement officer. Is it your testimony that you were told by a case officer that you had disbursed funds for an Oswald project? Yes, sir. Am I to believe that you were not aware at the time that you made the disbursement that it was, in fact, an Oswald project? That is correct, sir. It would have been a cryptonym, and he was telling you he had, in fact, made a disbursement. Yes, sir. And this would have been now shortly after the assassination. Yes, sir. Talking about hours or days, it was at least a matter of weeks and perhaps as much as 3 months. After the assassination, yes. And you were told all of this, yes. And it included the information that Oswald was an agent. Yes, sir. Was he described as an agent to you, or was he described as an operative or a paid informant? No, sir. He was described to me as an agent, and I was led to believe from the conversations that he was an agent. As a point of information, are people who work within the agency fairly careful in their language in describing what the category of certain people are who work for the agency? Generally so, I would say at the time. And it is your clear recollection that he was described as an agent? Yes, sir. And the information given you occurred some 3 months after the actual assassination. That would put it in early 1964. Yes, sir, early 64. When did you leave to go back? June of 64. So it was sometime between February and June of 64, or perhaps it was January. In 1964, of course, the Vietnam War was going on, and Lyndon Johnson was now president. And when did you begin to develop attitudes of dissatisfaction with the agency and its reaction and attitudes towards what you described as undemocratic principles and a lack of humanism? Well, actually, even prior to the Kennedy assassination, my wife and I both became disturbed about the stories that we kept hearing about things, control of newspapers, and so on. How long had you been married, by the way? We were married in 54. And you and your wife both went to work for the CIA at the same time? Yes, sir. In 1957? Yes. I'm to presume that you told your wife of the conversation you had with this case officer at the time? Yes, sir. And she was aware of it from 64 to 68? Yes, sir. When you decided to release that information? Yes. And your dissatisfaction with the agency in the course of American government preceded the actual assassination of President Kennedy? Well, the agency, yes, sir. Mr. Dodd then says, and this was a view shared by you and your wife? Yes, sir. At that time, yes. Did anyone else at the agency know your views of the agency? Did you communicate your dissatisfaction with anyone? Yes. Would you care to tell us the names of the people you communicated with? Particularly George Breen and redacted to a lesser extent. Mr. Dodd says, I'm a little confused. I suppose, Mr. Wilcott, did you vote for President Kennedy? Yes, sir, I did. You liked him? Very much. I'm just a little confused, I guess, over your reaction here. By your own testimony, you were supportive of the president, and certainly the most significant tragedy, I think, in the last 15 or 20 years was the president assassination. And you're told by someone who worked for the agency that Oswald was a CIA agent, and you were already dissatisfied with the actions of the agency. And you were told this in 64, and yet it takes 4 years or 2 years after you had left the agency, recognizing the tremendous importance and significance of that. Am I terribly confused as to why you decided to keep that information to yourself and your wife? I was quite afraid, frankly. You may have covered this well, Mr. Chairman, and if you have, I will drop the question, but you apparently indicated that you feel there was a direct connection between the Bay of Pigs operation and the assassination of the president. Did you cover this ground? Did you want to do this or intend to proceed with that line of questioning? I did not intend to get into that area. Just 1 second then. Mr. Wilcott, maybe we can expedite this somewhat by asking you this. Do you have any firsthand knowledge or information as a link between the failed Bay of Pigs operation and the assassination of John F. Kennedy? No, sir. I have no further questions. And Mr. Cornwell says, in the conversations which you've described occurring within a period of 1, 2, or 3 months after the assassination with other CIA employees and officers, did they suggest in those conversations to you that their employment, the CIA's employment of Oswald, had any relation to the assassination, or only that it related to events you've already described, namely the training of him in Atsugi in the Russian language and the sending of him to Russia and using him as a double agent and that sort of thing? I'm sorry, sir, I lost the thread of your question. In the conversations you had with other CIA employees, the 6 or 7 persons who purported to have good information about the use of Oswald as an agent, did any of those people say anything to you which suggested that the CIA had some role in the assassination of President Kennedy? Yes, sir. What did they say along those lines? Along those lines, they'd say things like, well, that Oswald couldn't have pulled the trigger, that only the CIA could have set up such an elaborate project, and there was nobody with the kind of knowledge or information that could have done this, and this was more in the speculative realm. As far as they actually said, they were having trouble with Oswald and that there was dissatisfaction with Oswald after he came back from the Soviet Union, and would say things like, well, this was the way to get rid of him, to get him involved in this assassination thing and put the blame on Cuba as a pretext for another invasion or attack against Cuba. That was the kind of thing that people said. How much exact knowledge they had, it is impossible for me to say. I believe it was more in a speculative realm. At several points in your testimony, you've stated that there were 6 or 7 persons, and on each occasion, you raised the extent of their knowledge as new or believed. Apart from the one officer, you said that you had paid monies with respect to Oswald's cryptonym. What were the other 6 or 7 persons purported connection with Oswald and the agency's relation to him. They never revealed that to me, sir, as far as their relation with Oswald. Do you have any knowledge based upon your tenure at Redacted as to who would have trained Oswald in the Russian language if that occurred? No, sir. Let me interrupt. I'm afraid we're going to have to leave this to make a vote right now. We'll be back in 10 minutes. And then they have to resume in 10 minutes. Mr. Cornwell says, the cryptonym, do you write it down at any point? I may have, sir. I can't remember. Exactly, for sure. It seems to me I recall jotting it on a little pad that I had at my gate. What I did with the cryptonyms from time to time for something we would want to check back into their accounting for something. Is there any chance that record still exists? I doubt it, sir. Your best memory is you wrote it on a notepad. Is that correct? That is true, sir. What routinely was done with such notepads? Usually I threw them away at the end of a day, or once in a while I would put in a little folder where I would keep personal things, and it's possible I could have had it out in there, but certainly it would have been destroyed when I left. Do you recall whether or not you used that in the process of looking through the 30-day book you described? I can't remember, sir. It was not normally part of your duties or the scope of the knowledge that you routinely acquired on your job, as I understand it, for you to know what the cryptonyms meant. Is that correct? That is correct, sir. However, I take it from the fact that as you describe it, it wasn't always applied, that occasionally you did learn something about the identities of the persons or projects that the cryptonyms referred to. Is that correct? That is true. When this cryptonym was given to you by the officer, did any part of it ring any familiar note with you? Did you recognize any part of it? The first two letters or the last portion of it as referring to any geographic area or any type of activity or anything like that? No, sir, not that I can recall. Have you ever run into any similar cryptonym? Yes, sir. In other words, that is the first two letters or the last ones would have been the same as this. Yes, sir, it was a cryptonym that I was familiar, that it must have been at least the last 2 or 3 occasions that I had remembered it, and it did ring a bell, yes. Did you remember anything about it? Not at this time. I can't remember what it was. All you can recall is that when you heard it, that it was not first occasion on which you had seen it or heard it. That is correct. Why did you leave the CIA? My wife and I both left the CIA because we became convinced that the CIA was doing things that couldn't be reconciled with the basic principles of democracy or humanism. Is that the only reason? It's the principal reason. Let me rephrase it. Was there any dispute between you and the agency? No, sir. Did they request that you leave? No, sir, they did not. Did any event cause any disagreement between you and the agency? No, sir. Had you done anything or said anything, engaged in any activity which became of concern to them? No, sir. I had been involved in, at one point, with a civil rights group, but they had investigated and said there was no wrongdoing on my part as far as the association with the civil rights group goes. What group was this? Now, this was SNIC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, before they became a Black Power group. What, if any, investigation did the agency do with respect to that? They called me up to Chief of Security, the agent security, and they interviewed me on association that I had with the group, and then they gave me a polygraph, in fact, 2 polygraphs, concerning my association with the group of people that I had met. Did they tell you whether or not you passed the polygraphs? Yes, they did. They told me that I had passed both of these. It is your testimony, as I understand it. The first time that you spoke about the Oswald agency matter outside of the CIA was after you left the CIA. Is that correct? That's true. On what occasion and to whom did you speak? When I first started speaking, both of my wife and I discussed it, and we felt we should be speaking about not only Oswald, but some other things. There was what we did to contact people, as many people all at once, and we figured this would be our best protection, that the more people that knew about it, the more protection it would be for us. What type of people were they? Mostly people that were involved in the civil rights movement or in the anti-war movement in '68. How many of them were newspaper or magazine reporters or involved in at least the news business? None initially. The first contact I had with any reporter or newspaper people or any media people was with Glad Day Press. What year was that? That was late '68 or perhaps early '69. You had signed a secrecy oath while you were employed with the agency. Yes, sir. Did you, at the time you made the decision to discuss outside the agency the matter, did you focus on the secrecy oath problem? And Mr. Cashapp says, Mr. Chairman, I would like to interpose, I guess, an objection, although I would like to make it more in the nature of a request that I have some problems in terms of advising my client with respect to possibly self-incrimination, that I would not advise him to go into questioning of his specific knowledge of the oath and the application to what he did, or other than the fact that he has told you, which is a fact that he did sign the oath. But to go into his mental processes as to whether he felt he was then doing related to the oath in a particular way, I would request that those questions not be asked on the grounds they may violate either his First Amendment rights or his Fifth Amendment rights, and that would be all right if you have something. Perhaps I can rephrase the question and get to more pointedly what I need without running into a problem. Did you contact any CIA officer or employee with respect to the secrecy oath and discuss with them whether or not you should be permitted to discuss these matters outside the agency? No, sir, I did not. To your knowledge, when was the first point in time which your extra-agency discussions on this subject matter came to the attention of the agency, if ever? I have no idea. At what point in time did your discussions outside of the agency first become a matter of publication in a newspaper or magazine or on television? In December of 1975, in the little magazine called The Pelican at the University of California, and an interview was conducted by a reporter from that magazine. And with that, at least in part, would that interview have contained your resume of the Oswald agency matter, your statement about that matter? Very briefly, it did, yes, in what was finally published. That is, the subject matter, your statement on the Oswald agency matter, be printed or otherwise publicized in a news publication, radio, or TV, or anything like that on any other occasion. Yes, sir. When was that? On 2 other occasions. I was on KPOO radio in San Francisco, and I discussed it in detail, in quite a bit of detail, the speculations and also the incident of the case officer contacting me at the window. What year was that? That was November of 77. Last November? Yes. On any other occasion? Yes, sir. At Oakland Technical High School, at the invitation of social department, asked me if I wanted to speak, and I said yes. So I spoke about 2 classes at the Oakland Technical High School. This was about, I believe, October of 75. On what other occasions? Not publicly. I spoke to groups in their homes, and I spoke to groups in the Peace and Freedom Party, and I was with the Peace and Freedom Party for several years. But your testimony, your statements on the subject hadn't been made a matter of publicity on any other occasion, not to my knowledge. Has any representative of the agency or anyone you believed might be a representative of the agency ever come to contact you and discuss these matters? Not directly, no, sir. I have no further questions. Under our committee rules, Mr. Wilcott, a witness is entitled at the conclusion of the questioning to make a 5-minute statement if he wishes, or to give a fuller explanation of any of his answers, so that at this time you may take the 5 minutes available if you care to elaborate or say anything. I don't really have anything, and maybe I would just like to say that I think it is time we got this thing cleared up, and I think for the good of the country and for good of people, I think this is really time all the facts were brought up and the people really get the facts. Thank you. We appreciate that. And if at any time you think of any further way in which your testimony can be corroborated, or the name of any other CIA man, or any record or anything of that sort that might be able, we hope you will get in touch with us and let us know about it. Surely will. Thank you, and we appreciate your time. And that is the end of the testimony of Mr. James Wilcott, who is a confirmed CIA employee at the Atsugi base. And, well, you heard his testimony there. Now, this is another example of, lone nutters will be like, well, if somebody would have talked if they knew something, right? Well, here's another example of somebody talking, right? Another great example of somebody talking was Thomas Beckham, right? That's a great example of that recording that we played. So this is another example of somebody talking. Is he telling the truth? I don't know. He seemingly was with the CIA, and then he got involved with a bunch of civil rights groups. Kind of makes you wonder. He was with the CIA for like 10 or 11 years, right? He wasn't some fresh cut. He moved up the ranks, and then all of a sudden, he said, yes, I resigned from the agency, and I went to the Miami station. Wait a minute. You went to the Miami station? You mean you moved to Miami? Because he never clarified. Did he move to Miami, or did he go to the Miami station? Sounds to me like this fuck was sheep-dipped. Sounds to me like after he got out of the fucking agency, he continued to associate with some weird civil rights groups, just like a fucking CIA agent would. Right? Do I believe this testimony? I don't know. It's got a kernel of truth, I'm sure, but do I believe the majority of it? I can't really say. So I'm not going to pass any judgment on it whatsoever. This is one of those things that no one will ever pass any judgment on. They can't pass any judgment on it, and it just kind of has to exist as what it is without, we'll never have any corroboration of any of this stuff. But it is what it is, and so that's going to do it for today, guys. Once again, hey, I'm taking up a collection to buy a new Mac, so please, if you can make a donation at buymeacoffee.com/JFKbook. Anything will do. Or you can buy my notes for $50, or you can buy a copy of my book or whatever. But I need to get a new computer because there will be no progressing in putting together my next selection of notes until I get a fucking Mac. End of story. So, all right, guys, I will be back on Monday. Thanks for your time.